The Phoenix Sky Harbor security checkpoint erupted in chaos as airport police surrounded TSA officers Steve Garrison and Kyle Henderson. Jordan Mitchell stood calmly beside the shredded remains of his passport, watching as his FBI badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights where it had fallen from his jacket. "Sir, we had no idea," Garrison stammered, his face drained of all color as he stared at the federal credentials scattered across the metal detection table. "That's enough," Agent Derek Lawson announced as he approached with a team of federal agents, flashing his own badge. "Special Agent Mitchell, are you injured?" Jordan brushed fragments of his destroyed passport from his sleeve, his expression unreadable. "I'm fine, Agent Lawson. Though I believe these gentlemen have some explaining to do." Henderson, the younger officer who had laughed moments earlier while tearing apart the passport, now stood frozen as the reality of their catastrophic mistake became undeniably clear. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Jordan Mitchell, a 15-year veteran of the FBI's counterterrorism division, had no idea that his routine business trip would expose a pattern of discriminatory behavior that had been hiding in plain sight for years. What started as a simple security screening would ultimately lead to a federal investigation, policy changes, and a reckoning for those who thought they could abuse their authority without consequences. The Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport serves over 45 million passengers annually. Terminal 4, where our story takes place, is known for its efficiency and modern security systems. Security Gate 12, managed by TSA officers with years of experience, processes hundreds of travelers every hour during peak times. But behind the professional facade and standardized procedures, some officers had developed their own unofficial methods for dealing with passengers they deemed suspicious, methods that had nothing to do with actual security threats and everything to do with racial profiling and personal prejudice. Steve Garrison, a 12-year TSA veteran, had built a reputation among his colleagues for his thorough screenings and attention to detail. What many didn't realize was that his definition of thorough varied dramatically depending on the passenger's skin color. His partner, Kyle Henderson, was a recent hire eager to impress his senior colleagues and fit in with the established culture of the checkpoint. Together, they had perfected a system of harassment disguised as security protocol, extra searches, document scrutiny, and intimidation tactics designed to make certain travelers feel unwelcome. They believed their badges gave them unlimited authority and that complaints from passengers would never be taken seriously. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Jordan Mitchell's background made him particularly dangerous to their assumptions. As a counter-terrorism specialist, he understood security procedures better than most TSA officers. As a federal agent, he had the knowledge and connections to fight back effectively. And as a black man who had faced discrimination throughout his career, he had learned the importance of patience, documentation, and strategic thinking when confronting injustice. But none of that was visible when he approached Security Gate 12 on that Tuesday morning in March. To Garrison and Henderson, he was just another black traveler in a business suit, someone they could intimidate without consequences. What happens next will shock you and remind you why it's so important to treat every person with respect and dignity. These TSA officers had no idea they were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. Stay tuned as we reveal exactly what led to that dramatic confrontation you saw at the beginning of this video. The story is about to get much more intense. Now let's rewind to Tuesday morning, March 15th, when FBI Special Agent Jordan Mitchell arrived at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport for what should have been a routine business trip. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the terminal as Jordan pulled his black rolling suitcase through the automatic doors of Terminal 4. At 42 years old, Jordan Mitchell was a respected figure within the FBI's counterterrorism division. Standing 6 feet tall with a calm, confident demeanor, He had spent the last 15 years protecting American citizens from threats, both foreign and domestic. His colleagues knew him as meticulous, patient, and absolutely unflappable under pressure. Qualities that had served him well during high-stakes investigations and dangerous operations. Jordan was traveling to Seattle for a joint task force meeting with Homeland Security officials. The case involved tracking financial networks used by terrorist organizations, and his expertise in forensic accounting had made him an essential part of the investigation. He carried with him a briefcase containing classified documents and his laptop with encrypted files, standard equipment for an agent of his caliber. His wife, Dr. Keisha Mitchell, had dropped him off at the airport before heading to her pediatric practice. Their 17-year-old son, Cameron, was already at school, probably focused on his upcoming SATs rather than his father's latest assignment. It was a typical morning for the Mitchell family, busy, productive, and filled with the quiet confidence that comes from years of professional success and community respect. Jordan had been through airport security hundreds of times throughout his career. He knew the procedures by heart: laptop out, liquids in a clear bag, shoes off, metal objects in the bin. He had TSA pre-check, which usually meant a streamlined process through a dedicated lane. But Terminal 4 was experiencing unusually heavy traffic that morning due to a delayed flight from the previous evening, and several security lanes had been consolidated. As he approached Security Gate 12, Jordan noticed the checkpoint was staffed by 2 TSA officers he hadn't seen before during his regular travels through Phoenix. The older officer, whose name tag read S. Garrison, appeared to be training a younger colleague identified as K. Henderson. Both men were white, and Jordan observed their interactions with previous passengers as he waited in line. What he witnessed during those few minutes of observation would later prove significant. Jordan noticed that their screening procedures seemed to vary dramatically based on the passenger's appearance. White business travelers moved through quickly with minimal interaction. But when a Hispanic family approached the checkpoint, both officers suddenly became much more thorough, requesting additional documentation and conducting what appeared to be unnecessary additional screenings. An elderly black woman traveling with her granddaughter was subjected to a particularly invasive search of her carry-on bag, with Officer Henderson commenting loudly about suspicious items that turned out to be prescription medications in their original pharmacy bottles. The woman appeared embarrassed and flustered by the attention, while other passengers in line grew impatient with the delays. Jordan's trained eye recognized the pattern immediately. As a federal agent, he had been briefed extensively on discriminatory practices in various government agencies. What he was witnessing wasn't random security protocol. It was systematic profiling based on race and ethnicity. When it was finally Jordan's turn, he approached the podium with his boarding pass and passport ready. He maintained his professional demeanor, greeting both officers politely. "Good morning, gentlemen." Officer Garrison barely looked up as he examined Jordan's documents. "Business or pleasure?" he asked in a tone that suggested he was already forming assumptions about the answer. "Business," Jordan replied simply, not volunteering additional information. His FBI training had taught him to be observant but not confrontational in situations like this. He wanted to see how far their bias would take them. Henderson, the younger officer, stepped closer with an expression that Jordan recognized immediately, the look of someone who had already decided he was dealing with a problem. "What kind of business?" he pressed, though this question wasn't part of standard TSA protocol. "I'm attending a conference in Seattle," Jordan answered truthfully, maintaining eye contact and speaking clearly. He noticed both officers exchange a quick glance, as if they were communicating something without words. Garrison held Jordan's passport up to the light, examining it far more thoroughly than he had for previous passengers. "This passport looks pretty new," he commented, though Jordan's passport was actually 3 years old and showed obvious signs of regular international travel. "I travel frequently for work," Jordan explained, Still maintaining his calm demeanor, despite recognizing where this interaction was heading, Henderson moved to examine Jordan's briefcase with unnecessary intensity. "You'll need to open this for additional screening," he announced, though Jordan had already placed it in the X-ray machine like every other passenger. As Jordan complied with their requests, he mentally catalogued each deviation from standard procedure. His training had prepared him for this moment, though he had hoped never to experience it personally. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a federal agent dedicated to protecting American security, being treated as a potential threat because of his skin color. What Jordan didn't know was that officers Garrison and Henderson had noticed his expensive suit, his confident bearing, and his professional briefcase. Rather than recognizing these as signs of a legitimate business traveler, they had interpreted them as evidence that he was trying too hard to appear respectable. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose years of discriminatory practices and ultimately change policies throughout the entire airport system. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What happened next would transform a routine security screening into a federal incident that exposed the ugly reality of racial profiling in America's airports. Officer Garrison handed Jordan's passport back to Henderson with a deliberate slowness that suggested they were buying time to find a reason for additional scrutiny. "Sir, we're going to need you to step aside for enhanced screening," Henderson announced loudly, drawing attention from other passengers in line. His voice carried just enough authority to make it sound official, but Jordan recognized it as theater designed to embarrass and intimidate. Jordan remained calm, though his internal alarm bells were ringing. "May I ask what triggered the enhanced screening?" he inquired politely, knowing his rights as both a citizen and a federal agent. Garrison stepped forward with a smirk. "You're asking a lot of questions for someone who just wants to catch a flight. That's suspicious behavior right there." His tone was mocking, designed to provoke a reaction that would justify escalating the situation further. As Jordan was directed to a secondary screening area, he noticed other passengers watching the interaction. Some appeared uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, while others seemed to accept it as normal airport security procedure. An elderly white businessman shook his head sympathetically, while a young mother pulled her children closer, clearly wanting to avoid becoming involved. Henderson began examining Jordan's briefcase with exaggerated thoroughness, removing each item and placing it on the metal table with deliberate force. He held up Jordan's laptop as if it were evidence of wrongdoing. "Pretty expensive equipment for a conference attendee," he commented loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "It's standard business equipment," Jordan replied evenly, though he was documenting every inappropriate comment and procedural violation in his mind. His FBI training had taught him to remain observant and factual. Even under stress, Officer Garrison joined his colleague at the table, creating an intimidating presence as both men loomed over Jordan's belongings. "What kind of conference requires classified-looking documents?" he asked, rifling through Jordan's briefcase without following proper protocols for handling sensitive materials. Jordan's jaw tightened slightly. The documents in question were clearly marked with FBI headers and contained information related to his official duties. Any trained security professional should have recognized them immediately and handled them with appropriate discretion. Instead, these officers were treating them like contraband. "Those are official government documents related to my employment," Jordan explained, maintaining his professional composure despite the increasingly hostile atmosphere. Henderson laughed mockingly. "Right, and I'm the president. You expect us to believe you work for the government?" His tone dripped with disbelief and racial condescension that made several nearby passengers visibly uncomfortable. The situation escalated when Garrison picked up Jordan's passport and began examining it with a magnifying glass, muttering comments about suspicious travel patterns and document authenticity. Jordan had traveled extensively for FBI business with stamps from countries across Europe, Asia, and South America, evidence of his legitimate government work that the officers were deliberately misinterpreting. This passport shows an awful lot of international travel for someone claiming to attend business conferences, Garrison announced publicly. Makes you wonder what kind of business he's really conducting. Jordan felt his patience wearing thin, but forced himself to remain calm. I travel internationally as part of my job responsibilities. Everything in that passport is legitimate and can be verified through proper channels. Henderson exchanged a meaningful look with his partner before making a decision that would change everything. You know what? I think there's something wrong with this passport. The photos don't look right, and some of these stamps look suspicious. Before Jordan could protest, Henderson grabbed the passport and began examining it roughly, bending the pages and handling it in a way that was clearly designed to damage the document. Yeah, definitely suspicious. This might be a counterfeit. Officer, please handle that carefully, Jordan said firmly. That's an official United States passport, and damaging it is a federal offense. Garrison stepped closer, invading Jordan's personal space in an obvious intimidation tactic. Are you threatening us? Because making threats against federal officers is a serious crime. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Jordan. He was being accused of threatening federal officers, while he himself was a federal agent being harassed by airport security. But before he could respond, Henderson made the catastrophic decision that would end both their careers. You know what I think about your fancy passport? Henderson said with a sneer. I think it's fake, and I think you're trying to use it to get through security illegally. With that, he began deliberately tearing pages from Jordan's passport, shredding the document that contained years of legitimate travel documentation and official government endorsements. The sound of tearing paper echoed through the security checkpoint as other passengers gasped in shock. Jordan watched in stunned disbelief as his official government passport, a document that had taken him through high security locations around the world, was systematically destroyed by a TSA officer who had decided to make an example of him. The pages fell to the floor like confetti, carrying with them evidence of Jordan's legitimate government service and international assignments. There, Henderson said with satisfaction, brushing the remaining fragments from his hands. Now let's see you try to travel with that fake document. Garrison nodded approvingly at his partner's actions. Good catch, Henderson. We probably just prevented a major security breach. Jordan stood perfectly still, his hands clenched at his sides as he processed what had just occurred. In his 15 years as an FBI agent, he had faced armed terrorists, international criminals, and life-threatening situations. But nothing had prepared him for the humiliation of watching his official government credentials destroyed by prejudiced airport employees who saw his skin color as probable cause for suspicion. The scattered remains of his passport lay on the floor around his feet, like evidence of institutional racism made manifest. Other passengers stared in uncomfortable silence, sensing they had witnessed something deeply wrong, but unsure how to respond. What officers Garrison and Henderson didn't know was that destroying Jordan's passport had just triggered a chain of events that would expose their discriminatory practices and lead to federal charges. They had chosen the wrong man to humiliate, and their moment of triumph was about to become their worst nightmare. While Jordan Mitchell stood surrounded by the shredded remains of his passport at Security Gate 12, 3 miles away at the FBI's Phoenix field office, Special Agent Derek Lawson was preparing for his own flight to Seattle. As Jordan's partner in the counterterrorism task force, Derek was scheduled to meet him at the Seattle airport before their joint briefing with Homeland Security officials. Derek, a seasoned agent with 12 years of experience, had worked closely with Jordan on dozens of high-profile cases. Their partnership had earned them recognition throughout the Bureau for their meticulous investigative work and their ability to track complex financial networks used by terrorist organizations. Derek respected Jordan not just as a colleague, but as one of the most principled and capable agents he had ever worked with. At 6:45 a.m., Derek received what should have been a routine text from Jordan, running late due to security delay. "Will update shortly." Derek thought nothing of it initially. Airport delays were common, especially during busy travel periods. He continued his own preparations, reviewing case files and confirming their meeting schedules in Seattle. But when 30 minutes passed without another update, Derek began to feel concerned. Jordan was punctual to a fault, someone who always communicated clearly about timeline changes. A security delay lasting more than a few minutes was unusual, particularly for someone with Jordan's travel experience and TSA pre-check status. Derek tried calling Jordan's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Airport security areas often had poor reception, so this wasn't immediately alarming. However, Derek's investigative instincts, honed by years of federal law enforcement, began to trigger warning signals. Meanwhile, at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., Assistant Director Nicole Barnes was conducting her weekly briefing with regional field office supervisors. The Phoenix field office was represented by Deputy Supervisor Martinez, who updated her on the status of various ongoing investigations, including the Seattle Terrorism Task Force meeting that Jordan and Derek were scheduled to attend. Assistant Director Barnes had personally recruited Jordan to the Counterterrorism Division 5 years earlier, recognizing his unique combination of financial expertise and field experience. She considered him one of the Bureau's rising stars and had been instrumental in his recent promotion to senior special agent status. Agents Mitchell and Lawson should be arriving in Seattle by noon, Martinez reported during the briefing. They're carrying the financial analysis that could break open the Al-Rashid network investigation. Barnes nodded, knowing the significance of the case. The Al-Rashid investigation involved tracking sophisticated money laundering operations across multiple countries, and Jordan's forensic accounting skills had been crucial in identifying patterns that other agents had missed. The briefcase he was carrying contained encrypted files that represented months of painstaking investigative work. Back at Phoenix Sky Harbor, Jordan's situation was deteriorating rapidly. The destruction of his passport had attracted the attention of other TSA supervisors. But rather than questioning Garrison and Henderson's actions, they seemed to be closing ranks around their colleagues. TSA Supervisor Carmen Rodriguez approached the scene, her expression suggesting she was more concerned about potential complaints than about the obvious rights violations that had occurred. "What's the situation here?" she asked Garrison, not bothering to address Jordan directly. "Suspicious passenger with questionable documents," Garrison replied confidently. Henderson identified potential forgery and took appropriate action to prevent a security breach. Jordan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, I'm Special Agent Jordan Mitchell with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. These officers just destroyed my official government passport without cause or proper authorization." Rodriguez looked at him skeptically, clearly not believing his claim. "Do you have any identification to support that statement?" Jordan reached slowly into his jacket, mindful that any sudden movements might be misinterpreted by the increasingly hostile security team. His FBI credentials were in his inside jacket pocket, along with his service weapon, which was properly declared and documented for travel. As he withdrew his credential wallet, the federal badge caught the fluorescent lights of the security checkpoint, its gold finish gleaming unmistakably. The FBI shield and identification card were clearly visible, along with his photograph and official designation as a special agent. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Rodriguez's expression shifted from skepticism to alarm as she recognized the authentic federal credentials. Henderson, who had been standing proudly beside the destroyed passport fragments, suddenly looked uncertain. But it was Garrison's reaction that proved most telling. Rather than showing appropriate concern or apologizing for the misunderstanding, he doubled down on his position. "Anyone can buy a fake badge online," he declared loudly. This just proves he's running some kind of sophisticated scam. Jordan's patience, which had held steady throughout the ordeal, finally began to show cracks. "Officer, I'm ordering you to contact your supervisor and the FBI field office immediately. You've destroyed federal property and interfered with an official government investigation." Henderson began to realize the magnitude of their mistake, but Garrison continued his aggressive stance. "You're not ordering anybody to do anything. We don't take orders from passengers, no matter what fake credentials they're waving around." What none of them knew was that Derek Lawson, growing increasingly concerned about Jordan's extended silence, had already contacted the Phoenix field office duty desk. Agent Sarah Chen, the duty officer, had immediately begun making calls to locate Jordan and determine the cause of his communication blackout. At 7:15 a.m., Chen placed a call to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport Police, requesting a welfare check on a federal agent who had failed to check in during a routine security screening. Airport Police Chief Michael Torres, a former military officer who maintained excellent relationships with federal agencies, immediately understood the seriousness of the request. "We have a federal agent requesting assistance at Terminal 4, Torres announced over his radio. "All available units respond to Security Gate 12 immediately." The convergence of these parallel developments meant that help was already on the way. Even as Jordan stood surrounded by hostile TSA officers who refused to acknowledge his federal authority, the very badge that Garrison dismissed as fake was about to be validated by an entire team of federal agents and airport police. Officer Torres himself was en route to the security checkpoint, carrying with him the authority to override TSA decisions and the experience to recognize authentic federal credentials. His arrival would mark the beginning of the end for Officers Garrison and Henderson's careers. Jordan, still maintaining his professional composure despite the escalating situation, made one final attempt to resolve the matter peacefully. "Officers, I'm giving you one last opportunity to contact the FBI field office and verify my credentials. If you refuse, you'll be dealing with a much larger federal response." Garrison laughed dismissively. "Keep threatening us, buddy. See how far that gets you." He had no idea that federal agents were already mobilizing across the city and that his career was about to end in spectacular fashion. Before we reveal what happens when those federal agents arrive at the airport, I want to pause and ask you something important. Put yourself in Jordan's shoes for a moment. You're a decorated federal agent, someone who has dedicated his life to protecting his country, and you're being humiliated and having your official documents destroyed simply because of your skin color. What would you do in that situation? Would you lose your temper and escalate the confrontation, potentially giving these officers ammunition to justify their actions? Or would you maintain your composure and trust that the system you've served faithfully would eventually work in your favor? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Comment number 1. If you think Jordan should have been more aggressive in asserting his authority from the beginning. Comment number 2, if you believe his patient, professional approach was the right strategy. And comment number 3, if you think there was a better way to handle this entire situation. Your perspective matters because incidents like this happen more often than most people realize. Airport security, traffic stops, shopping. While black, these everyday interactions can turn into life-changing confrontations when prejudice meets authority. The way we respond to these situations can determine not just our immediate safety, but whether real change happens or the system continues unchanged. While you're thinking about that, make sure you've hit that like button if this story is keeping you engaged. These stories take hours of research and careful writing to bring you the most accurate and compelling content possible. Your likes help us reach more people who need to hear these important messages about justice and accountability. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We post new content every week featuring real stories of people standing up to discrimination and abuse of power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Trust me, the stories we share will challenge your thinking and maybe even inspire you to speak up when you witness injustice in your own community. Here's another question for you to consider. How many times do you think incidents like this happen where the victim doesn't have Jordan's advantages? Think about it. Jordan is an FBI agent with connections, resources, and knowledge of his rights. He has colleagues who will notice when he doesn't check in, and the institutional backing to fight back effectively. But what about the countless other travelers who face similar discrimination without those advantages? The college student traveling home for the holidays, the businessman trying to make an important meeting, the grandmother visiting her grandchildren. How many of them have had their documents destroyed, their dignity trampled, their rights violated by officers who assume they can act with impunity? This is why stories like Jordan's matter so much. When someone with power and position experiences discrimination, it shines a light on what happens to everyone else in the shadows. It forces conversations that might otherwise never happen and creates opportunities for systematic change rather than just individual justice. The officers who destroyed Jordan's passport thought they were dealing with just another black traveler they could intimidate without consequences. They had probably done similar things to dozens, maybe hundreds of other passengers over the years. The difference this time was that they picked someone who could fight back effectively. But here's the thing, Jordan's story isn't just about one man getting justice. It's about exposing a pattern of behavior that affects entire communities. When federal agents start investigating TSA practices at Phoenix Sky Harbor, they're going to discover that Garrison and Henderson's actions weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a culture that allowed, and maybe even encouraged, discriminatory treatment of minority passengers. So as we continue with this story, remember that what happens next isn't just about Jordan Mitchell getting vindication. It's about accountability for everyone who has been targeted by officers who thought their badges gave them the right to treat people as less than human based on their appearance. The federal response that's about to unfold at Security Gate 12 will send shockwaves through the entire airport system. When word gets out that TSA officers destroyed an FBI agent's passport, it's going to trigger investigations, policy reviews, and uncomfortable questions about training and oversight that have been avoided for far too long. Are you ready to see what happens when institutional power meets individual prejudice head-on? Because what's coming next will restore your faith in the idea that justice can still prevail when good people refuse to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. Keep watching. Keep engaging, and remember, your voice matters in these conversations about equality and justice. The comment section is where we build community around these important issues, so don't be shy about sharing your thoughts and experiences. Now, let's get back to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, where Jordan Mitchell is about to receive backup that will change everything. At 7:22 a.m., the first signs of the federal response began to materialize at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. Airport Police Chief Michael Torres arrived at Terminal 4 with two of his senior officers, moving with the purposeful urgency that comes from understanding the gravity of a federal agent in distress. Torres had received Agent Sarah Chen's call from the FBI duty desk 7 minutes earlier, and his years of experience working with federal agencies had taught him to take such requests with absolute seriousness. The fact that an FBI agent had missed a scheduled check-in during a routine security screening suggested either a medical emergency or a serious procedural violation. As Torres approached Security Gate 12, he could see the commotion from 50 yards away. A crowd had gathered around the checkpoint, with passengers backing up in both the regular and pre-check lines. Several travelers were recording the incident on their phones, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Meanwhile, 3 miles away at the FBI Phoenix field office, Agent Derek Lawson had escalated his concerns to Deputy Supervisor Martinez. The combination of Jordan's missed communications and the duty desk's airport welfare check request had triggered the Bureau's missing agent protocol. Initiate code yellow, Martinez instructed Agent Chen. Full communication trace on Agent Mitchell's devices and immediate field response to his last known location. Within minutes, a team of 4 FBI agents was en route to Phoenix Sky Harbor, led by Senior Agent Patricia Vance, a 20-year veteran known for her methodical approach to crisis situations. Agent Vance understood that if TSA officers were interfering with a federal agent's travel, the incident had implications far beyond a simple misunderstanding. Back at Security Gate 12, Chief Torres identified himself to TSA Supervisor Rodriguez, who was attempting to manage the growing scene while supporting her officer's version of events. Chief Torres, Airport Police, he announced, displaying his credentials. I'm responding to a federal agent welfare check. Where is Special Agent Mitchell? Rodriguez pointed toward Jordan, who remained standing calmly beside the scattered remains of his passport. That individual claims to be FBI, but our officers determined his credentials were fraudulent. Torres approached Jordan directly, his trained eye immediately recognizing the authentic federal badge and identification card that Jordan held. As a former military police officer with extensive experience in document verification, Torres could distinguish genuine federal credentials from counterfeits within seconds. Special Agent Mitchell, Torres said professionally. I'm Chief Torres, Airport Police. Agent Chen from your field office requested a welfare check. Are you injured or in immediate danger? No injuries, Chief, Jordan replied, his voice steady despite the stress of the situation. However, these TSA officers destroyed my official passport without cause and refused to acknowledge my federal credentials. Torres examined the shredded passport fragments on the floor, his expression growing increasingly serious. The destruction of a federal agent's official documents constituted multiple violations of federal law. Regardless of the officer's motivations, Officer Garrison, sensing the shift in dynamics, stepped forward aggressively. Chief, this guy has been uncooperative and threatening since we started screening him. We followed proper protocols for suspicious passengers. Torres turned to face Garrison, his 25 years of law enforcement experience evident in his authoritative presence. Officer, you've destroyed a federal agent's passport. That's a felony under Title 18 of the U.S. Code. I need you to step back immediately. Henderson, who had been growing increasingly nervous as more officials arrived, made a critical error in judgment. We don't answer to airport police about TSA security decisions, he declared loudly. We have authority over this checkpoint. The challenge to Torres's authority in front of witnesses and cameras proved to be the final mistake in a series of catastrophic decisions. Torres keyed his radio with deliberate calm. Dispatch, Code 3 response to Terminal 4, Security Gate 12. Federal crime in progress. Request FBI liaison and TSA Federal Security Director immediate response. The radio call echoed through the terminal, and passengers began to understand they were witnessing something far more serious than a routine security delay. Several business travelers who had been delayed by the incident began documenting the scene more systematically. Recognizing potential legal significance at that moment, Agent Derek Lawson arrived at the checkpoint, having driven directly from the FBI field office after receiving clearance to respond personally. His arrival marked the convergence of Jordan's professional and personal support systems. "Jordan!" Derek called out as he approached, his relief at seeing his partner unharmed evident in his voice. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Derek," Jordan replied, maintaining his professional composure. "These officers destroyed my passport and refused to accept my federal credentials." Derek examined the scattered passport fragments, his expression hardening as he realized the deliberate nature of the destruction. As Jordan's partner, he understood the significance of the documents that had been destroyed, passport pages containing evidence of classified international assignments and official government travel. "Officers," Derek announced to Garrison and Henderson, "I'm Special Agent Lawson, FBI. You've interfered with federal agents conducting official business and destroyed government property. You're both under federal investigation as of this moment. Supervisor Rodriguez attempted to intervene, sensing the situation spiraling beyond her control. Agents, I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding through proper channels. Derek turned to address her directly. Ma'am, this isn't a misunderstanding. Your officers profiled my partner, destroyed his official documents, and refused to acknowledge his federal authority. This is a pattern of behavior that suggests systematic civil rights violations. The arrival of Agent Patricia Vance and her team 30 seconds later transformed the checkpoint into a federal crime scene. Vance took immediate control of the situation, directing her agents to secure the area and begin documenting evidence. Clear the checkpoint, she ordered. Nobody leaves until we've documented this scene and interviewed all witnesses. Torres coordinated with Vance to establish a perimeter while Rodriguez frantically called TSA headquarters, realizing that her officers had created a federal incident that would require explanation at the highest levels of the Department of Homeland Security. The transformation of Security Gate 12 from a routine checkpoint into a federal crime scene happened with stunning swiftness. Agent Patricia Vance surveyed the destruction scattered across the metal table and floor, her experienced eyes cataloging evidence that would become crucial in the federal investigation to follow. Agent Mitchell, Vance said professionally, please walk me through exactly what occurred here, starting from your initial approach to the checkpoint. As Jordan recounted the systematic harassment, document destruction, and refusal to acknowledge his credentials, Vance took detailed notes while her team photographed the scene. The scattered passport fragments, the roughed-up briefcase contents, and the positioning of witnesses all told a story of deliberate misconduct rather than mistaken security protocol. Officer Garrison, who had maintained his aggressive stance throughout the morning, made one final attempt to control the narrative. Agent Vance, these individuals are disrupting airport security operations. We followed standard procedures for suspicious passengers who couldn't provide adequate identification. Vance turned to face Garrison directly, her 20 years of federal law enforcement experience evident in her unwavering gaze. Officer Garrison, you destroyed the official passport of a federal agent conducting government business. That constitutes destruction of federal property, interference with federal operations, and potentially civil rights violations under color of authority. Henderson shifted nervously beside his partner, the reality of their situation finally penetrating his earlier bravado. We had legitimate security concerns about the authenticity of his documents, he said weakly. Agent Derek Lawson stepped forward, holding up his phone. Officers, I have Agent Mitchell's travel authorization from FBI headquarters, his classified clearance documentation, and confirmation of his counterterrorism assignment. Every document you questioned was authentic and verifiable through proper channels. Chief Torres added his voice to the growing wall of authority surrounding the TSA officers. Gentlemen, even if you had genuine concerns about document authenticity, destroying a passport is never acceptable protocol. You should have contacted federal authorities for verification. The crowd of delayed passengers had grown larger, with many recording the confrontation on their phones. Elena Vasquez, a business traveler who had witnessed the entire incident, stepped forward to address Agent Vance. Agent, I saw everything from the beginning, she said clearly. These officers treated him completely differently than other passengers. They made racist comments and seemed determined to find problems where none existed. Her testimony was corroborated by several other witnesses, including James Park, an off-duty police officer from Tucson who had been traveling for a family visit. The profiling was obvious from my position in line, Park confirmed. I've never seen TSA officers behave so unprofessionally. TSA Supervisor Rodriguez, realizing the mounting evidence against her officers, attempted damage control. I'm sure this was all a misunderstanding that can be resolved through internal TSA review procedures. Agent Vance's response was immediate and definitive. Ma'am, this incident is now under federal investigation. TSA internal procedures are inadequate for potential civil rights violations and destruction of federal property. At that moment, Jordan's FBI badge slipped from his jacket pocket, where he had returned it after showing Chief Torres. The distinctive gold shield hit the floor with a metallic clink that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet checkpoint. As Jordan bent to retrieve his credentials, the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. The badge that Officers Garrison and Henderson had dismissed as fake lay gleaming on the same floor as the destroyed passport fragments, surrounded by federal agents who were treating Jordan with the professional respect he had been denied all morning. Henderson stared at the badge on the floor, finally understanding the magnitude of their error. "Sir, we didn't know," he began. "You didn't know because you didn't want to know," Jordan interrupted, his calm finally showing cracks of controlled anger. "You saw my skin color and decided I was suspicious. You saw my professional appearance and assumed I was pretending to be something I wasn't. You destroyed my documents because you believed someone like me couldn't possibly be legitimate, Agent." Vance documented Henderson's attempted apology as evidence of the officer's awareness of wrongdoing. "Officer Henderson, are you acknowledging that you made assumptions about Agent Mitchell based on his race?" The question hung in the air as Henderson realized that any answer would constitute either an admission of racial bias or perjury in a federal investigation. His silence spoke louder than words. Frank Morrison, the airport's general manager, arrived with legal counsel and immediate orders to cooperate fully with the federal investigation. Morrison's first action was to suspend Garrison and Henderson pending the outcome of federal charges. "Officers, you're relieved of duty effective immediately," Morrison announced. "Security badges and equipment will be surrendered to Chief Torres." The systematic dismantling of the officer's authority provided a stark contrast to their earlier arrogance. Garrison, who had mocked Jordan's claims about his father's government work, now found himself stripped of his own official authority by the very federal system he had dismissed. Assistant Director Nicole Barnes arrived by federal helicopter, landing at the airport's emergency pad and proceeding directly to Terminal 4. Her presence elevated the incident to the highest levels of federal law enforcement priority. "Agent Mitchell," Barnes said as she approached, "are you injured or in need of medical attention?" "No, ma'am, I'm unharmed," Jordan replied. Though the stress of the morning was evident in his voice, Barnes surveyed the scene with the strategic mind that had earned her promotion to one of the FBI's top positions. "This incident represents a pattern we've been tracking across multiple airports. Your experience will be crucial evidence in our broader investigation of discriminatory TSA practices." The revelation that Jordan's harassment was part of a larger pattern under federal investigation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. TSA officials realized they were facing not just an isolated incident, but scrutiny of systematic discrimination. Officer Garrison made one last desperate attempt to justify their actions. "We were protecting airport security from potential threats." Agent Barnes turned to address him directly. "Officer, the only threat to airport security was your refusal to follow proper verification procedures. Agent Mitchell posed no danger to anyone except your assumptions about who belongs in first-class lounges and government positions." As federal agents continued documenting evidence and interviewing witnesses, the power dynamic that had begun with Jordan being humiliated and dismissed had completely reversed. The officers who had destroyed his passport now stood powerless, facing federal charges and career termination. The badge on the floor had become a symbol of institutional authority that would ultimately triumph over individual prejudice, though the cost in dignity and trust would take much longer to repair. 3 weeks after the incident at Security Gate 12, the consequences for Officers Garrison and Henderson were swift and comprehensive. The Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General had launched a full investigation, while the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division filed federal charges against both officers for violating Jordan's constitutional rights under color of authority. Steve Garrison faced federal charges including destruction of government property, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to deprive rights. His 12-year career with TSA ended in termination and a federal conviction that carried a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. The investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning his entire tenure, with 17 formal complaints that had been systematically buried by supervisory staff. Kyle Henderson, despite his shorter tenure, faced similar charges. His cooperation with federal investigators, including testimony about the informal training he received regarding problem passengers, resulted in a reduced sentence but permanent disbarment from federal employment. His recorded statements revealed the toxic culture that had encouraged racial profiling as acceptable security practice. TSA supervisor Carmen Rodriguez was reassigned pending investigation into her failure to address discriminatory practices under her supervision. The review of her division revealed that complaints from minority passengers were routinely dismissed or never formally documented, creating an environment where officers like Garrison felt empowered to act on their prejudices. The systemic changes implemented at Phoenix Sky Harbor became a model for airports nationwide. The Department of Homeland Security mandated comprehensive bias training for all TSA personnel, established independent oversight committees with community representation, and implemented body cameras for all passenger interactions at security checkpoints. Most significantly, a new federal protocol required immediate notification of FBI field offices whenever TSA officers detained or questioned any federal employee, regardless of agency or clearance level. The Mitchell Protocol, as it became known within law enforcement circles, ensured that Jordan's experience could never be repeated without immediate federal oversight. Jordan returned to his counter-terrorism work, though the Seattle mission had been postponed while the investigation proceeded. Assistant Director Barnes personally ensured that Jordan received counseling support and additional protective measures. During the high-profile legal proceedings that followed, what happened to you represents a failure of the system we're sworn to protect, Barnes told Jordan during a private meeting at FBI headquarters. Your professional response under pressure prevented this from becoming a violent confrontation. But you shouldn't have had to endure that treatment in the first place. Jordan's testimony before Congress about discriminatory airport security practices led to the Airport Security Accountability Act, which mandated federal oversight of TSA operations and established civil penalties for agencies that failed to address pattern discrimination. His calm, factual presentation to lawmakers provided powerful evidence of how racial bias corrupted security. Procedures designed to protect all Americans. Dr. Keisha Mitchell had watched her husband's ordeal transform from personal trauma into national reform. I'm proud of how you handled yourself, she told Jordan after his congressional testimony. But I'm even prouder that you turned your experience into something that will help other families. Their son Cameron, initially angry about his father's treatment, found inspiration in Jordan's measured response to injustice. Dad showed me that real strength isn't about fighting back with anger, Cameron later wrote in a college application essay about courage. It's about using your voice and position to create change that lasts longer than any individual confrontation. The financial settlements reached with the affected passengers totaled over $2 million. But Jordan donated his portion to civil rights organizations working on transportation equity issues. Money can't repair the dignity that was damaged, he explained during a press conference. But it can fund education and advocacy that prevents future incidents. Elena Vasquez, the business traveler who had witnessed the entire incident, became an unexpected advocate for airport passenger rights. Her viral social media posts about the confrontation had initially brought national attention to Jordan's case, and she continued documenting discriminatory practices she observed during her frequent travels. Seeing how they treated Agent Mitchell opened my eyes to what other passengers must experience regularly. Vasquez explained during a television interview, if they would destroy an FBI agent's passport, imagine what they do to people without his resources and connections. The Phoenix Sky Harbor incident prompted similar investigations at airports across the country, revealing patterns of discriminatory enforcement that had operated without oversight for years. The Federal Aviation Administration established passenger rights offices at major airports, staffed with advocates trained to address bias complaints and ensure equitable treatment. Officer James Park, the off-duty Tucson police officer who had witnessed the confrontation, used his testimony in the federal case to advocate for bias training in his own department. Seeing federal officers hold their colleagues accountable reminded me that we all have responsibility to speak up when we witness discrimination, Park reflected. 6 months after the incident, Jordan was promoted to senior special agent and assigned to lead a new FBI task force focused on civil rights violations in federal transportation security. His unique experience as both investigator and victim provided valuable perspective for addressing systematic discrimination in government agencies. The task force's first major investigation targeted airports, where passenger complaint data suggested patterns similar to what Jordan had experienced. Their work led to policy changes, personnel transfers, and criminal charges against security officers in 12 different cities. Agent Mitchell's experience became a catalyst for reform across the entire transportation security system. Assistant Director Barnes noted in her annual report to Congress, his professional response to personal injustice exemplifies the highest standards of federal law enforcement. During the 1-year anniversary of the incident, Jordan returned to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport for a ceremony dedicating the new Passenger Rights Center. Standing in Terminal 4, near where his passport had been destroyed, he addressed an audience of transportation officials, civil rights advocates, and community members. What happened to me here was wrong, but it wasn't unique, Jordan said during his remarks. The difference was that I had the resources and support to fight back effectively. Real justice means ensuring that every passenger, regardless of their background or connections, receives the respectful treatment that should be standard in American airports. The scattered fragments of his destroyed passport had been preserved as evidence in the federal case, but they also served as a reminder of how quickly dignity could be shattered by unchecked prejudice. The new protocols implemented in response ensured that such destruction would trigger immediate federal intervention and accountability. TSA Administrator Jennifer Walsh attended the ceremony, acknowledging the agency's failures and committing to continued reform. Agent Mitchell's experience revealed serious flaws in our training and oversight, Walsh admitted publicly. We're committed to earning back the trust of all passengers through transparent accountability and zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior. The transformation of Security Gate 12 from a site of humiliation into a symbol of reform represented more than individual vindication. It demonstrated how institutional change could emerge from personal courage and strategic patience, creating lasting protection for future travelers who might otherwise face similar discrimination. Jordan's badge, which had fallen to the floor during that confrontational morning, now sat framed in his office alongside commendations for his work on transportation security reform. The badge remained a reminder that true authority comes not from the power to intimidate, but from the commitment to protect the rights and dignity of all Americans. 2 years after the Phoenix Sky Harbor incident, Jordan Mitchell stood before a packed auditorium at the FBI Academy in Quantico, addressing new agent recruits about civil rights enforcement and professional integrity. His story had become required curriculum, not just as a cautionary tale about discrimination, but as an example of how federal agents should respond when the system fails to protect the people it serves. The badge you'll receive upon graduation represents more than law enforcement authority, Jordan told the diverse group of future agents. It represents a commitment to justice that transcends personal comfort, political pressure, and social bias. When that commitment is tested, as mine was at Security Gate 12, your response will define not just your career, but the integrity of the entire institution. The recruits listened intently as Jordan described the transformation from victim to advocate, from personal trauma to systematic reform. Many were inspired to specialize in civil rights investigations, drawn by Jordan's example of turning injustice into institutional change. Cameron Mitchell, now a freshman at Georgetown University studying international relations, often accompanied his father to speaking engagements. The teenager who had once been angry about his father's treatment now understood the broader significance of Jordan's measured response to discrimination. "My dad could have fought back with anger that morning," Cameron told a student audience at his university. Instead, he fought back with patience, professionalism, and strategic thinking. That's why we're here talking about policy changes instead of just another viral video of someone losing their temper. Dr. Keisha Mitchell had watched her husband's ordeal transform, their family's understanding of advocacy and service. Jordan's experience taught us that privilege comes with responsibility, she reflected during a medical conference panel on healthcare equity. When you have resources and platforms that others lack, using them for broader justice becomes a moral imperative. The Mitchell family's approach to the incident had demonstrated that effective response to discrimination required both immediate courage and long-term strategic thinking. Their decision to pursue systematic change rather than simply individual vindication had created protections for countless future travelers. Elena Vasquez, the business traveler whose testimony had been crucial in the federal case, established the Airport Passenger Advocacy Foundation with Jordan's support. The organization provided legal assistance to travelers facing discriminatory treatment and maintained a database of incidents that helped identify patterns requiring federal intervention. Witnessing Agent Mitchell's experience changed my perspective on bystander responsibility, Vasquez explained during the Foundation's annual conference. None of us can claim ignorance anymore about how discrimination operates in plain sight. We all have the power to document, testify, and advocate for change. The Foundation's work had led to settlements for dozens of passengers and policy changes at airports nationwide. Their mobile app allowed travelers to report discriminatory treatment in real time, creating accountability through transparency and community support. Officer James Park, the off-duty police officer who had witnessed the confrontation, used his experience to advocate for bias training in law enforcement agencies across Arizona. His testimony about the courage required to speak up against colleagues had influenced police reform efforts throughout the Southwest. Agent Mitchell showed me that real law enforcement means protecting everyone's rights, even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular, Park said during a police training seminar. If we don't hold ourselves accountable, we lose the trust that makes effective policing possible. The broader impact of Jordan's case extended beyond transportation security to influence federal civil rights enforcement across multiple agencies. The Department of Justice created new protocols for investigating discriminatory practices in federal facilities, while Congress passed legislation strengthening protections for government employees facing bias in the course of their duties. Assistant Director Nicole Barnes, now Director of the FBI, often cited Jordan's case when discussing the Bureau's commitment to civil rights enforcement. Agent Mitchell's experience reminded us that discrimination doesn't respect rank, position, or federal authority, Barnes noted during congressional testimony. Our response demonstrated that the FBI will use its full resources to protect civil rights, regardless of who violates them. The Phoenix Sky Harbor incident had become a case study in law schools, business schools, and public policy programs nationwide. Students analyzed Jordan's strategic response, the institutional failures that enabled discrimination, and the systematic reforms that emerged from federal intervention. Professor Sarah Chen at Georgetown Law School, who assigned Jordan's case in her civil rights course, observed that students consistently drew inspiration from his patient approach to injustice. Agent Mitchell's story teaches future lawyers that sustainable change requires both legal expertise and moral courage, Chen explained. His willingness to endure humiliation for the sake of documentation and evidence created a stronger foundation for reform than emotional reactions would have achieved. The international community had also taken notice of the case, with transportation security agencies in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia implementing similar oversight measures based on the American reforms triggered by Jordan's experience. As Jordan concluded his address to the FBI recruits, he returned to the fundamental principle that had guided his response that morning at Security Gate 12. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice pursued with wisdom and patience creates lasting change that protects future generations. Your oath as federal agents requires you to choose long-term justice over short-term satisfaction. The standing ovation that followed reflected not just respect for Jordan's service, but recognition that his example had elevated the entire profession's understanding of what it means to serve with integrity. The destroyed passport fragments, preserved as evidence in the federal case, had been donated to the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History as part of their civil rights collection. The exhibit featuring Jordan's story drew millions of visitors annually, ensuring that future generations would understand both the persistence of discrimination and the power of principled resistance. Today, Security Gate 12 at Phoenix Sky Harbor displays a plaque commemorating the passenger rights reforms that emerged from Jordan's experience. Travelers passing through the checkpoint see daily reminders that dignity, respect, and equal treatment under law are not negotiable aspects of American democracy. Jordan Mitchell's badge may have fallen to the floor that March morning, but his response lifted up an entire system's commitment to justice. The true measure of his victory wasn't the federal charges against discriminatory officers, but the millions of travelers who would never experience similar humiliation because one man chose patience over anger, strategy over emotion, and systematic change over personal vindication. What moments in your life have tested your commitment to justice? Share your experiences in the comments below, and let us know how this story has inspired you to speak up against discrimination in your own community. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage, justice, and positive change. Together, we can build a society where everyone's dignity is protected and respected, regardless of their background or appearance. Thank you for watching, and remember that your voice matters in the fight for equality and justice. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.